So this week we've all been spending some bittersweet but mostly happy time looking back on Irish football history and celebrating the impact that Jack Charlton has had. We spoke with Paul Rouse about the historical impact of the team that reached the tournaments. The President, Michael D. Higgins, shared his reminiscences and talked about the great coming out of football on the national stage. And all of Jack's most important players have shared some lovely stories for us as well. But the one aspect that we haven't kind of covered on Off the Ball just yet is the political climate of the time. And I'm delighted to say, to help us sketch out where Ireland was in 1990, we're joined now by Tommie Gorman of RTE. Tommie, you're very welcome. Thanks for taking the call.
Delighted to talk to you.
You had a fairly new role as European correspondent in 1990, but funnily enough, you weren't actually in Brussels for the penalty shootout. You were in Dublin. What was going on?
Yeah, I had gone to work in Brussels in October of 1989, just before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then from January the 1st of that year, for 6 months, Ireland took over the presidency of the European Union. And in those days, it really was a big deal because you hosted summits in your country. It wasn't a question of going to the summit in Brussels, as Micheál Martin is doing this week. The summits took place in the home of the home of the country that had a EU presidency at the time, the 6-month presidency. So Ireland, this small country, was in pole position when huge historic shifts were taking place in Europe. German reunification was being negotiated. There was a lot of tension over that. The Dutch, for instance, and the British had deep reservations about it, the idea of this huge new bloc emerging, a reunited Germany. And it fell to Ireland and Charlie Hoy as Taoiseach to chair some of those meetings. So as it happened, at the time of the penalty shootout, that particular game against Romania, you had the Brussels press corps camped at Dublin Castle, and the actual match itself coincided with the holding of the summit. And there was a huge press tent with hundreds of journalists, foreign crews, written press, and people from all over the European Union who happened to be on our patch on that particular afternoon.
So the game is on and people are watching it. And in the meantime, fairly serious matters of state are actually actively happening at that moment.
Yeah, I remember Charlie Hoy took this role very seriously. You know, you could see him puffing out his chest. This was Ireland in the big time, and usually we were minnows. We used to say that there were 4 members of what you called the Paupers Club. That's the phrase that the likes of John Downing and Sean Flynn, my colleagues in Brussels, Lord Rest Sean, that's a phrase we used to use. Because Spain, Portugal, Greece and Ireland were the poorest countries and the structural funds were beginning to flow. And at that time, we were developing a reputation for using the money well. And the refurbishment at Dublin Castle was part of that largesse. So here was Charlie in pole position at these very, very difficult negotiations. And at the particular moment the match was going on, I remember he was briefing some of the written press. Now, I was a football supporter as well as an RTE correspondent, and I knew what was going on. And I remember actually finding out where they were, and I went into the room, and he was a bit startled when he saw me coming in, and he said, "What's wrong with you, Gorman?" And I said, "Put on the television there." It said the penalty shootout in the match. So I went over and I pushed on the television, and the discussion in the room, their briefing of Charlie's great achievements, it stopped, and people began to watch the penalties. And then, of course, Packy saved, and O'Leary scored, and everyone just went wild. And to be fair to Hoy, he seized the moment. He saw he appreciated what was going on, and he ran out into the courtyard of Dublin Castle, where you had a lot of people in live camera positions. I'm nearly sure it was Sean Dignan who was down presenting our 6-1 news at the time. And Hoy danced a jig of delight in the courtyard as this was happening. And I think from then on, the story for all the journalists, it ceased to become European politics or the latest moves in relation to Germany and the tensions about that and how the Irish were hosting the presidency. The story became buck mad Dublin and Ireland and the crack that was going on. And of course, the pictures were everywhere because all you had to do was walk out of Dublin Castle and the celebration was everywhere to be seen. And you didn't even have to leave the castle, Ger, because there was this huge press tent. And inside there, the journalists were doing their work, but also you had huge screens up. They were keeping an eye on the match. And there's that absolutely magnificent shot of John Healey, who was a very, very famous Irish journalist. And he was there in the tent. He had been working as part of the Presidency team on the Healey books. And there's this wonderful shot of John Healey seeing what was going on and the tears streaming down his face, because he appreciated all the layers of politics and culture and history that were at play in those moments.
Everybody who's ever watched Reeling in the Years knows exactly who you're talking about, because it has passed into the cult. So one of the things that we've been talking about here is with the younger members of our team going, so you were born after this happened, what's it like? And they all talk about the guy crying on Reeling in the Years, and it turns out it was actually somebody quite well known.
Like John Healey his background was, Healey was the first great political commentator of modern Ireland. He was from Charlestown in Mayo, reared in Snipegrass. The reason I know these things, he was my first boss. He gave me my first job. One of the reasons he hired me was he noticed how there was a little patch in my trousers and it had been neatly darned. And he said, "Who darned the patch?" And I said, "My grandmother." And he says, "Kid, you come from Snipegrass, you'll be hungry too." So that was Healey. And part of Healey's tradition was Healey wrote that wonderful series of articles in the Irish Times when Douglas Gageby was the editor about the denuding of the West, about emigration and the impact not just on Charlestown and Mayo, but on the whole west of Ireland. So Healey became the champion of downtrodden west of Ireland. And in some respects, he cared so much about the place that maybe at times he went into the political tent to get things done. But Healey, because of who he was and because he had this huge knowledge of our past, he appreciated that what was happening here was much more than a football match. This was Ireland taking its place on the European stage, achieving something by effort. And I think because Healey had grown up with emigration, because he had seen so many of the lads he was at school with in Charlestown leave, he knew that the guys who were playing for this team, some of them were the sons and the grandsons of Irish emigrants. He understood that we were being managed by an Englishman, and he understood that, you remember the old chants that we used to have, "You'll never beat the Irish," that we were actually able to beat the English, we were able to get on with the English, and we were being managed by an Englishman. And some of the players were first and second generation Irishmen who had to go to England to get work. So he sort of appreciated the whole scale of that achievement. And he also realised that we were doing this in the full glare of the European audience. And we were taking our place as part of that Europe in footballing terms. And I think that every time I see those pictures of Healey, that's the level of emotional reaction that you had from him. He was seeing all of those things. And of course, what I didn't know then, and what he didn't know, what nobody knew, was the summer of 1990. And in January 1991, at his home in Fortfield Terrace in Rathmines, where John Healey lived with his wife Evelyn and his sons and daughters, John Healey died in his sleep at the age of 61.
Right. I didn't know that either. To be honest, I all my life I have assumed that these were pictures being beamed in from the RDS, and it was just some kind of organised commercial mass watching. But actually, it turns out this is the European press corps here for one of the most important presidential things that's happened. So we have Margaret Thatcher here concerned about the power bloc emerging in Berlin ultimately as it was going to be. This is a fairly remarkable time in European history.
It was. And we were, this place, the island beyond the bigger island. And we really were, we had joined with the British and the Danes in 1971. We had joined the European Union. Was it 71 or 73? So we were young members, and the first decade or so, The people who really got the European experience were the farmers, because we were integrated from the ground up, because the farmers suddenly began to get decent prices for their products. But the next phase in the 80s was when European funding through the Social Fund and through Delors' ideas and structural funds, it began to work its way into the infrastructure and into the education system. So the footprint, the European footprint was increasing, and the impact of Europe was increasing, and we were getting more into it. And in some respects as well, if you think about the 1980s, Ger, that's when we start to re-examine our relationship with the British in a very serious way, where we began to sit around the table with them as equals, and where we began to see we had some things in common with them. And in many respects, Charlton's football team reflected that new Ireland. It reflected, and like, we weren't just good time chancers.
Yeah.
We were a lot more than that. We were people who were willing, you know, the friendship that the foot soldiers, the real ambassadors of Ireland, were the fans. Like, okay, the foreign affairs guys were doing their work, their politicians were doing their work, performing on the big stage. The football team was doing its work. But the people who did, I suppose, most of the person-to-person, the human stuff, were the fans who got to travel to Europe. But for the European press corps who came to Dublin, they saw a completely different Ireland. They saw this friendly place, and it wasn't expensive in those days, and the friendship was genuine. I remember I had a cameraman friend called Fred Nerak. He was a Belgian guy, and I remember he stayed out partying through the night. I know the two people who put him to bed that night. Fred was subsequently killed in friendly fire in the Iraq War, but I remember him saying to me that that was one of the best times in his life, that summit in Dublin.
Because so frequently the conversation is the Ireland football team started too well and this somehow kick-started a new national identity. But actually, they're coincidences that this is happening at the same time. You talk about the importance of the structural funds. Like, you know, I certainly remember being a kid and Albert Reynolds coming back with, I think, 8 billion. And this being this kind of mad, like, brilliant story that led the news for weeks, essentially. It was like, we're going to be okay. Something brilliant is happening here.
Yeah, that Albert Reynolds stuff was, some 12 years later. That was the Edinburgh summit when all seemed lost. He'd had a very, very poor election. And then suddenly they went for gold and they got more than they were expecting. And that was used to entice Labour into government. But roll back the years to 1990, it was completely different. We were only at the very beginning of the journey. Like, immediately after that match, Haughey brought his ministers, and clever Haughey, for political cover, he brought leaders of the opposition on the government jet as well. That was to go to the quarter-final in Rome. And before the actual match took place, there was a dinner in a place called the Villa Madama. It's in the hills over the Olympico Stadium. I know because I was there. I travelled to cover it. I was in the villa. Haughey arrived with all his ministers, and they were meeting their Italian counterparts immediately before the match. Because this was coming up to the end of June, start of July. And what the Irish were doing was they were handing over the baton, the European presidency, to who was going to take it over? The Italians took over from the Irish. So there was there was a synchronization going on. It was serendipity, the way the whole thing happened. So at this meal anyway, Haughey's opposite number at that time was a guy called Giulio Andreotti. And even by Italian standards, he deserved a role in The Godfather. And Andreotti, I know this is true because Haughey told me it, that Andreotti, at the end of that evening, he gave him a special medal that had been minted, just marking, say, his contribution during the Irish presidency to European politics. And this was Haughey's memento. So you had that meal, and then the guys went down in their limousines down to the Olympico Stadium for the match itself. And again, I remember covering that. And because we were with the band, in some respects, we were given this great access point in the stadium. So I actually watched that match from the midfield area along the sideline on that cindered turf area, where we could have good access to the VIPs, shots of the VIPs in the stadium, and where you could see every move in the game. And, you know, to my dying day, I'll still see the flight of Donadoni's shot, and it came at Packy Bonner like a bullet because it swerved in the air. It had that sort of, you know, the way you hear in the comics we used to see the banana shots. Well, this really did bend. Really, really treacherously as it came towards Bonner, and then he could only parry it, and then Toto stuck it in, and then of course the Italians had Baresi and they had Maldini. They were the experts in defending, and Ireland just couldn't get through. But it was a fantastic time. I remember as well how he went into the dressing room afterwards, but it was like a morgue, and we filmed in the dressing room, but because we came from the exterior and we were into this place where you had all the sweat and all the steam from the showers and so on, and the bodies, the tired bodies, the warm bodies, I think that the stuff fogged up, and those pictures never made air, but they've stayed in my mind since.
As somebody who fully understands the football aspect of it, and as a dyed-in-the-wool League of Ireland aficionado, a big Sligo Rovers supporter, what do you make of that easy narrative that we've always had about, the football team kickstarts everything? Because it does seem as if our ability to embrace the European adventure is actually the most important transformational moment in Ireland's history, from one of those 4 countries that were the poorest nations to a country that suddenly is a modern, forward-thinking, progressive European nation.
A very wise person said to me once, what is life but love and sport? Because sport can capture all the most important values that we have, the highs and the lows. It can represent everything. I think what happened then was that sport absolutely was pitch perfect in the way it summed up where we were and where we wanted to be. And it was the vehicle that allowed us to do those things. Like, we really were trying to do them in business. We really were trying to do them in politics. We were trying to do them at so many levels. But I think sport allowed us, it gave us the confidence to make the breakthrough. Like, we actually became good at it. And not only was it important in the European context and how we were perceived in European terms, but I'd go as far to say that it's actually the time when we began to redefine our relationship with the British. Because when you think about it, like, Jack Charlton was one of them. He had won the World Cup for them, but he became one of us. He got an Irish passport, and he was extremely comfortable being Irish. He loved going to Bala. He loved fishing. Yeah, he loved going to Alan Cairns' family home. And the people that he was achieving this with, like, John Aldridge had an English accent. So did Ray Houghton. And then we had another generation of fellas like Kevin Moran, who had played GAA for Dublin and who played for Manchester United. And we had Paul McGrath. And what did that say about our society? And all these wonderful things were happening. And as I look back on it now, maybe it's reading too much into it, but I actually think that we began to redefine our relationship with the British then, because we always had this love-hate thing. Like, we give out hell about them, we love to beat them, but we followed their football all the time. We couldn't give our footballers the proper platform in our own country. We couldn't give our people work in our own country, but they went to England. So we had this really, really complex relationship with them. And I think on the European political stage and on the sporting stage, under Charlton, this was his great, great gift. We began to get comfortable with all those complexities and at times contradictions. But suddenly all of those things, the bits seem to fit, the jigsaw pieces seem to slot into place. And I really think that, I was talking to Elaine Flynn about this, Sean Flynn's widow, one of the days, and she said they were salad days. They were a lovely time in her lives. And I was 34 at the time, and I can't really think of a better time in my life than then.
It's a brilliant way to put it, about the making peace with the contradictions that we have and beginning that process of healing with, with our colonial oppressor or our nearest neighbour. And actually,
and sure, when you think of it as well, like the Dutch Prime Minister at the time was Ruud Lubbers, and they had lived next door to the Germans. They had bad time during World War II, and Lubbers was very, very reluctant in terms of German unification. Thatcher took a stand on it. She had real difficulties with it. And I remember afterwards, Lubbers Some people thought he was a shoo-in to become president of the European Commission. And he got bushwhacked, and the job went to the last man standing, a guy called Jacques Santer from Luxembourg, who wasn't exactly a star. Thatcher, you remember, she subsequently went to, it was a meeting of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It was on in Paris, and it was to celebrate the ending of the Cold War and fall of the Berlin Wall. And that night when she was in Paris, the vote was taken in the House of Commons, where she was challenged by Heseltine, where she came out of the British embassy in Paris, and she nearly fell over John Sargent. And that was the night that the mortal wound was suffered by her in that vote in the House of Commons. So that German reunification issue, it became extremely difficult for some people. And, you know, there were consequences, say, in European politics. But from an Irish perspective, all those consequences were positive, as this small country, 4 million people at the time, during our 6-month presidency, important decisions were taken. And the money we were getting in structural funds, it was entirely in keeping with the Delors philosophy of you give the largesse to the places that need it most, and they in turn will come up. Well, that investment that was made in the Irish as members of the European Union and the ideology that we bought into, that was returned in spades during those years.
Yeah, 100%. It really paid off. Tommie, like all great pieces, there's new information and new details. We've spoken about John Healey, and a whole new generation are going to now be familiar with his. There was one other piece that one other line in your piece that I just wanted to draw attention to, and that was you were on the plane with Ray Tracy, and he talked about the generosity of John Giles. I just thought this was phenomenal story, and I hadn't heard it before.
Yeah, there were a few people doing packages at the time. We had actually gone to Recce, Italy. Talk about a lovely gig. We went to Italy in April to look at the facilities that Irish fans would be using. You know, we got to Gigi Riva territory. We got to Sicily, we got to Sardinia, and then we got back to Rome. And it was a wonderful trip. But I got to know, you know, some of the travel agents who were doing, you know, preparing packages at that time. And Michael Caslin from 747 was one of them. And Ray Tracy had a very big, successful business at the time. And as luck would have it, I was sitting beside him on the plane when we were going after the Romania victory over to Rome for the match against Italy, for the quarter-final. And of course, I knew him as an Irish legend, you know, who just never stopped trying. I knew him and disliked him from, you know, the Shamrock Rovers involvement. But it was such an honour to be in his company. And we got chatting, and we were talking about football. And he told me a wonderful story about Johnny Giles that, you know, has coloured my view of the two men since. Ray said that, you know, he had been around a lot of clubs in football, and he tried to do his best to amass something of a nest egg. And he said that he made a few bad investments. From memory, I think he talked about maybe at some stage investing in a laundry or something, but it hadn't gone well. And he got this phone call from Johnny Giles, and of course they had played together and they knew each other quite a long time. And he said they talked about a few things, and then Johnny Giles said to him, well, how are things? And Tracy said to me that his pride wouldn't let him say, well, they're not great. So he said, oh, everything's going grand. Yeah, fine, everything grand. So Johnny Giles listened, and then he just said to him quietly, not in any sort of I suppose, a forceful way. He said to him, look, I'm going to put a check in the post to you tomorrow. It's going to be blank. You can fill it in for, and I think he mentioned a number of figures. And he said to him, don't worry about any interest and pay it back whenever. And that was that. And Tracy said that it was just the absolute lifeline that he needed, that it was the real mark of a gentleman. And he also said the way in which it was done, you know, that he was left his dignity by the conversation. And he said, that's how, you know, that was why he had such respect for Johnny Giles. I thought it was a lovely story.
It really was, and it's beautifully told. And Tommie, you've been great with your time, so generous. Salad days, I think, is the phrase that we're going to take away from this. Absolutely, and what an amazing bursting in and telling Hoy, right, stop telling everybody how great you are. The penalty shootout is on.
Oh, Jesus, I don't know if I was as assertive as that. But it was just instinctively, I went in there. And, you know, sometimes in life, when it's a choice between trying something or doing nothing, you know, most of the time you're best to try it.
Tommie, great stuff. Thanks a million for sharing that with us.
Cheers, Chair.
It's Tommie Gorman there, a brilliant raconteur, telling us what it was actually like to be around in 1990 and covering that. And like, what a trip to be essentially on the touchline for the biggest game, it turns out, in Irish football history. It has been a week where we've been relaxing into some memories, and it's been a sad week, but it's also been a week of celebration of Jack Charlton's life. Have a listen.
We've had some great days and great nights and good memories. I hope that the people of Ireland have got... I know that they've got the memories. I know they cherish them, and I know that they've enjoyed the days that when they've done something that they've never done before. They go to a World Cup as part of it a couple of times. They've enjoyed that, and the European Championship.
Thank you for the days, those endless days, those sacred days you gave me.
The president phoned me and said, would you like the job is yours if you would like it. And I said I would like it. End of story.
I won't forget a single day, believe me.
Well, you know, we're 28-1, I think, we're quoted as, and we're not expected to do anything in this competition. We just hope to surprise a few people.
This kick by Sanson, in goes Aldridge, and Houghton! 1-0!
Nowadays, you see, they've changed it. Everybody in Europe does a little bit of what we did. Everybody in Europe. But they've changed the name, the FIFA guys. They call it pressing, because they don't want to tell us that we started it. We call it putting people under pressure.
Malta 0, Republic of Ireland 2, and history has been made in Malta. Jack Charlton achieving his victory, achieving his ambition.
We've qualified for the go to Italy, and we've done it ourselves. I'm absolutely delighted, not only for me, for our lads and for all the fans.
The nation holds its breath. Yes,
and then I saw David coming, and I'm not the greatest believer in centre-backs taking penalties. And then David went back, put the ball down again, and sent the goalkeeper away and put it in, and it went fantastic. We're in the last eight for the first time in my history, and it's magic. I'm delighted for the lads. And good luck to the people back home. Hope they have a good part. Dern came to me and he said, our boss, he said, when we get to Rome, you'll get us in to see the Pope, won't you? Well, that was where the final was going to be played, and I don't think that the prayer again was the final. Right. We prepared properly. We had a little bit of sun. We ate well. And we drank very little. We're going to change that tonight.
You see, it's a bit like religion, isn't it? And football's a bit like religion, isn't it? And Jack's, he'd be like a sort of, I suppose, be like a pope or a bishop or something. He would.
but easy, onto it comes Houghton, and Houghton with a shot, and it's there!
I went into the players and we just sat in the dressing room and we were getting changed and everything. And then somebody come and said to me, would you come out back on the pitch? I said, what for? He said, the crowd won't go home. I just remember, I just cried. It was time for me to leave. I'd been there for 10 years and it was time for me to leave. And I did.
Now, tonight's Sligo Rovers tie with Viking begins in Norway. It is the Conference League, and former Northern editor and Europe editor with RTE, but most importantly, Sligo Rovers superfan Tommie Gorman is with us on the line. Good morning to you, Tommie. How are you getting on?
Great form. You live for mornings like this where you're looking forward to your team playing for the first time in the third round of a European competition. And you can just imagine what it's like for those young lads this morning. Like, we have fellas from Mayo and from Leitrim and from Sligo and from Donegal and elsewhere. But you can imagine what it's like for them in their young lives, looking forward to going out and playing in a major stadium in Norway tonight. Just living the dream, really.
What is it like for you at this point in your life as somebody who's, I guess, known Sligo Rovers your entire life? For as long as you can remember, you've known Sligo Rovers. What is this feeling like as you look forward to tonight?
Well, this time 45 years ago, I was in my first job in journalism, and Sligo Rovers that year, they had won the league and they qualified in the European Cup to play against Red Star Belgrade. So I was going to the match in Yugoslavia, and I still treasure those memories. They're still very fresh 45 years on. So as a fan today, you're just so conscious that you really need to fuel the dream every so often, to fill up the tank by qualifying for European competition, because the finances of it are so important. And the model we have in the showgrounds, community-owned club, people's club, we need days like this to get young lads into our academy. And we also need, say, a run like this for our finances, because if you look at the kind of money that's generated by, say, getting into a third round, it's probably about 750,000 net. And that's, more than 50% of what it takes to run the club per year. So you need that kind of cash injection to stay, in that top group in the Premiership. You look at, say, the likes of Shamrock Rovers, who will get a run this year in the Champions League, then the Europa League, and if they fall out of that, the Conference League, that's worth over $1 million, maybe $2 million to them in a season like this. So you can see why they're so far out front within the League of Ireland with that kind of finance coming in. Big day for Pats as well, European game, third round as well. So very important for them and for the chasing pack. And I also think it's such encouragement for that breed of young manager that we have in the League of Ireland now. Very, very good, committed guys, from, the Stephen Bradleys to, Damien Duff has his track record. We have young John Russell. You have the likes of Stephen O'Donnell. You've got Tim Clancy. And even somebody like Ollie Horgan, who's down there struggling with Finn Harps at the bottom of the league today. He aspires to get into a European round like this with Finn Harps. So it's such a good advertisement for the league today. So we should all be kind of proud today, I think.
For sure. Can I ask, how many Sligo people made that trip to Yugoslavia all those years ago?
Small number. Some of the committee members, and it was on a scheduled flight. And say, for instance, with the Rovers this time around, we were lucky in the first two rounds because we were in Bala in Wales, low costs and easy for fans to get to. And then we were blessed in the second round, Motherwell. Again, you could travel across to Scotland, handy enough. Today's different. So the team and the few committee members who've gone with them, they had to travel from Belfast across to Aberdeen. And then they got a flight from Aberdeen across to Norway. So that becomes more expensive. But interestingly, the second leg of the Viking game in the showgrounds that takes place this day week, that's already sold out. And the club made the deliberate decision to not move it to, say, the likes of Tala, because that would mean huge expense for our supporters. But by doing so, by keeping it in Sligo, you're only going to get 3,800 fans into the showgrounds because it has to be an all-seater. That's the rule. And we had to get permission from UEFA to actually stage it in the showgrounds. We had to get a derogation because normally for a third round match, you'd need to be in a stadium that can hold at least 5,000 seated. So we got that derogation. But we literally could have sold another 2,000 or 3,000 seats in the showgrounds handy a week in advance. And that's the kind of decision you make. And that's where the finances become important, because what we're looking to do in the longer term is to have a stadium that will hold 5,000 or 6,000 people, where you'd be able to accommodate all your support base on a night like this.
Tommie, I was in Sligo last week for the game, and it was like I got down in the mid-afternoon and everywhere you looked there was Sligo Rovers jerseys. Like, the place was heaving, the atmosphere across the day was brilliant, and like I'm guessing that must be up there in terms of the nights, the sort of the European nights, because Sligo Rovers had a lot of big nights in Europe, but not necessarily big wins. Like, there was a lot of sort of, runs where they lasted for one tie, for one game. But this must be sort of right up there in terms of like cementing memories for the next generation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, you're 1,000,000% on the money. The location of the showgrounds, it's in the centre of the town. It's a 12-acre site. and everybody in the area knows the Rovers. They're of the people. But to get to a third round is new territory for us. And like the pictures, the television pictures were fantastic. I saw at one stage there was a shot of a group of people behind the goals in the television feed. And I spotted in there Aidan Keane's partner and their little baby. And you could see that, you know, they were close to the goals that he was going to be shooting into. And then, you know, a number of times the ball went out of play behind the goals, and you cut to the shots of the young lads catching the ball and holding on to it, trying to kill a few seconds in the game to sort of try and take the steam out of any challenge that was coming from Motherwell. But of course, it was a magnificent achievement in its own right, the match you were at, because Motherwell are a Premiership club in Scotland. And for a club like Sligo Rovers to actually beat them in the home game in Motherwell, and then to come back to the showgrounds and to put not just one but two past them, like that was really, really magnificent. It's interesting what has happened with the Rovers in the last few weeks. Liam Buckley brought the club from a bad place. He stabilised it. We got European qualification twice under him, and Rovers will be forever grateful to him for doing that. And he had really good values. But then the management committee had a big decision to make because the results were going against us. Part of the problem was our own pitch at the start of the season and the kind of football Liam wanted to play. That wasn't his fault. But they brought in John Russell, Liam's assistant, and that was hard to end the relationship with Liam. But John Russell seems to be a lucky general, because in the game against Bala, in the showgrounds match, Bala beat us out the gate. They had a team of really wise characters who came to win, and only for Ed McGinty in that match. He saved us during the match, he saved us in extra time, and then he saved 2 penalties. And there was something beautiful about the way it ended for him, because he's a lovely young fella. He came to us after Celtic and Hibs had let him go. They said he was too small. He came up through our academy system, and his contract was due to run out in November, and he could have left for nothing. But he was keen that if he did go to across the water, that there'd be some money in it for the club that had helped him. So we got a decent transfer fee for him with some add-ons if he sold on to another club. And then we had another young keeper called McNicholas, who had been playing with them. We had him out on loan in Cliftonville last year, and his contract was due up in November as well. And he was wondering, am I going to get first team football? So it worked out beautiful for us in the end that Ed McGinty got away to Oxford, and now we've got young McNicholas in on a full-time contract with us, a new contract, and he's playing in tonight's match. So in that respect, things have fallen nicely for John Russell. Now, the downside of it is we were put out of the cup by Wexford last weekend. The same happened to Pats. They were beaten by Waterford. And you can see that pattern there for clubs that are making it to Europe, that sometimes it's such a stretch in the resources that they can't sustain their league or their cup form in Ireland. But if you were to ask me, would you take, you know, the results that we've had in recent weeks, including the defeats, I'd bite your hand off for them. It's just a lovely time for the Rovers.
Tommie, look, has Sligo Rovers always been in your life? Like, it's one of the people talk about League of Ireland football, and like there's parts of the country that don't have a League of Ireland team. There are parts of the country that do have a League of Ireland team, but it maybe doesn't necessarily penetrate the sort of local discussion in the same way that, say, the inter-county GAA scene might. But Sligo seems very different to me. You know, I think Dundalk and there's one or two other places that might be like that. But from day one, like, was Sligo Rovers always there for you, if you know what I mean?
I love sport. You know, this is a great year for Irish rugby. I follow Spurs. Things are coming on well there. I followed Spurs since I was 5. But the one result that really matters to me, the most important one, is always Sligo Rovers. Because they really are of the people. They're what defines us as a place. And most people in Sligo are like that. It's a garrison town. And you're right, there are places like, you have great affection for clubs like Pats, you have great affection for the likes of Bowes. You know, Shamrock Rovers had awful times where they were wandering around the city until they found their home in Tala. Of Cork have great support. Limerick have great support. And it's kind of sad, I think, in some respects, that this year's League of Ireland, you've got 5 teams in Dublin, you've got 2 in Louth, and you've got 3 in the Northwest. So if you draw a line from Dublin to the Northwest, like all those good soccer towns like Athlone, Galway have a good club, Limerick have a good club. There's nothing in Kilkenny. Wexford are in the 2nd division. And Cork, like wonderful, wonderful town. You know, remember Roy Keane came up through Cove Ramblers. It's really sad that, you know, big centres like that don't have a team in the Premier Division. And like we count our blessings in Sligo that we're not in the 2nd division, what is the 2nd tier, the 1st division, because that would be such a difficult division to get out of at the moment. It's so competitive. So yeah, these are good times with the Rovers. And a lovely thing about it is the way the academy system is working for us at the moment. Like in the past 12 months, 3 of our players, Johnny Kenny, John Mahon and Ed McGinty, have got across the water, you know, to try and pursue their career there. And last weekend, we had a fantastic result because this is the first time we've had a senior ladies team. And they pulled off, a magnificent result last week where they beat really fine club, you know, league leaders at the moment, where they beat Shelburne 3-2 at the showgrounds. So all those different elements of, say, the ladies' presence now, you see all the young girls in the showgrounds training, you know, most days now in the all-weather pitch at the front of the showgrounds. And then the youth team, that's the youth teams that are coming through and the academy players that are making it into the Rovers. And the guys we have, say, managing the side that's in Norway tonight, John Russell and Ryan Casey, they've come up through our underage structures. And John Russell himself is a wonderful example of what's going on in the League of Ireland. Like his sister, Julianne Russell, is a really fine player. John played with us. He played with Pats, got his degree in DCU, has done his badges. He's from Galway. His father and mother are real soccer people, always encourage their kids to get involved in sport. So you can see the fruits of the effort that families put into sport. You can see those coming through in Sligo Rovers at the moment.
Tommie, we have a photo here actually that you sent to us earlier on, you kneeling on the goal line there, praying for something a short time ago. When was this photo taken? What tell us the story of this pic.
That was the night of the miracle against Bala. There was one stage in the second half in extra time where they were pounding that goals, where you see me on my knees giving thanks after the match. And a guy headed the ball against the crossbar and everyone was on the ground, no hope of saving any rebound. And a fella comes in and he catches the rebound on the volley and he hit the crossbar. And there was this spontaneous lift of about 3,500 people in the stand. They just knew we hadn't dodged one bullet, we had dodged a machine gun. And everyone just got up and started chanting Rovers, Rovers. And we got to the end of that match and then it went to penalties. And young McGinty and the people advising him, they had actually studied the penalty taking techniques of Bala. So he went the right direction for all 5 penalties and he stopped 2 of them. So like it was a miracle that we got out of that one. And that allowed us to get into the round against Motherwell. And to be honest with you, when we drew Motherwell, I said, that's it. It's fantastic that we've got to a second round. And, you know, we won't be greedy. And if we can get out of this at losing, you know, by 2 or 3 in the overall over the 2 legs, you'd be content with that. But to actually beat Motherwell and to get into the third round, like, you know, this is such fun.
Are you going to be greedy tonight when you're looking to tonight's fixture and next week's fixture? Are you thinking, yeah, let's have it?
We're modest kind of people. You know, it doesn't suit us to be greedy. And we're very, very thankful in agriculture terms, in some respects, the hay is saved because we probably now have banked sufficient resources to keep this level of a full-time professional team on the go for the next 2 years. And hopefully we've qualified for Europe at some stage during that 2-year period again. And the other brilliant thing about it is this really helps us to make our case for state aid for our development plan for the showgrounds. Our centenary is in 2028, and our hope is that we will have a bigger showgrounds with a new pitch, new stands, and better commercial activities there by 2028. Another little interesting anecdote to tell you, one of our big supporters is a guy called George Mullen, and he puts in pitches all around the world. He has put in World Cup pitches in Qatar, he put in pitches in Russia, he's put them in many of the major stadiums. He's actually doing a pitch in South America at the moment. But George Mullen installed a new pitch in Motherwell. And the first game, the game that christened that pitch, the first competitive match, was the game that Sligo Rovers beat Motherwell 1-0. So one of our own helped us in that.
It's kind of one of the things that kind of really sticks out, Tommie, from listening to you talk this morning, is just that phrase about the club being of the people. You mentioned that a couple of times this morning, and it does feel that seems to be part of the relationship between the fan group and the playing group, regardless of where the players have come from. And there is a lot of people who are very much homegrown and are of the place as well. But it does seem that there is as much like a very, very close relationship between the fans and the players, almost on an intimate level, that they know the ins and outs of each of the players, and almost vice versa. Like, is that the case from your perspective as a fan of the club?
Absolutely. It keeps us honest as well, because there were so many financial crises in the showgrounds over the years that the ground would have been sold or mortgaged many times over just to keep us afloat, if we had been able to do that. But the way it's structured, the ground is owned in trust for the people, so you can't do that. And Sligo, it's 15,000-20,000 people, counties 65,000. So there's no big sugar daddy. Some of the other clubs like, Shamrock Rovers have got Dermot Desmond, they've got their pitch provided by the local authority. Dundalk have got an investment. Even Galway have got the Comers, who are very, very helpful to them. Pats have got Gareth Kelleher. Bows are a bit like ourselves, but, they've got very valuable real estate. But we don't have, Derry have, very, very benevolent chairman at the moment, but we don't have anybody with that kind of money. And we can't take in, private sector investment that would risk the future of the club. So basically, we eat what we kill. We have to generate our own revenue every year, through golden goals. And we have a network of people. There's a former chairman of Sligo Rovers called Dermot Kelly. He's an anaesthetist in the eye and ear and in St. Vincent's in Dublin. And Dermot was a fantastic chairman when we were flying high in the years when we won the league and the cup a decade ago. Dermot helped to build what we call the Volkswagen stand in the showground. We still have to put a roof on it. But Dermot Kelly has more clients and friends in Dublin who are in our 500 club, throwing in 240 quid a season on a direct debit system every year. And that kind of stuff is vital. So we rely on that kind of finance all the time. And even for, say, a game like Viking, it was very important for us that the commercial side of the club, and most of these people are volunteers, but that the commercial side of the club were actually selling out next week's match, just in case, you went down 5-0 tonight and all the air was taken out of the balloon. We know that we're going to have a great night and a financially successful night in the showgrounds this day week, because, sold out showgrounds with golden goals and match programme sales, the revenue you generate from that will probably pay the cost of getting the team to Norway. The flights, the hotels, and whatever else you need, the food. So you have to be thinking like that in a club like Sligo Rovers all the time. It's a kind of a sad dimension to it, in a way that you can never concentrate fully on what's going on the pitch, because you're also wondering how much have you taken in the turnstiles.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, Tommie, the very best of luck over these next two nights. Hopefully it's another very famous night for Sligo Rovers. Try and enjoy it as much as you can, and hopefully we'll chat to you again soon. Thanks a million.
Thank you, and thanks for the interest.
Tommie Gorman, hello.
How you doing, Joe? Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. Been a huge admirer from afar for many years, so it's great to talk to you. Where did you watch this, by the way? Where were you when Brian Dobson was, frankly, giving an interview that, the governments have fallen with less gravity on a news introduction? Where were you watching?
I wasn't watching. I was making sure that a tape continued to roll. It was going out live, Joe. We had interviewed Roy earlier in the evening. We didn't cut any of the material, but we tidied it up. We had 2 cameras shooting, so we were dropping in some cutaways. And then we had to get from the hotel to, we went to edit first, and then we went to a feed point. So it really was as live could be. So until the interview finished, we were still anxiously hoping that the tape feed wouldn't break down, because if it did, there was no backup plan. Ed Mulhall was the head of news in RTE at the time. Big Manchester United supporter, big sports supporter, encyclopedic knowledge of sport. And he was on the bridge in Donnybrook, just making sure everything went out. So we didn't have time to watch it anywhere. And I suppose in those days, there was no way you could pick up, say, a live RTE feed in Manchester. So it was, we might as well have been in Saipan. There was no way we could actually see the output. Bar said the situation we were in where we were feeding it live.
We'll jump around a bit here, Tommie. When you eventually did see the interview and did watch it back, what struck you about it in comparison to what it felt like when you were doing it?
I was really fed up in the immediate aftermath of the interview and in the times afterwards. And not as fed up now, because you sort of get on with life and you understand that's how tragedy happens sometimes. But I was fed up that the opportunity wasn't taken by all the different parties, Roy Keane included, for them all to calm down. Now the fact that he had come back from the other side of the Atlantic, the fact that McCarthy and the FAI were over there, that the clock was ticking, that the players had a certain mindset, Keane was gone. It was probably really a 1% or 10% chance anyway, where the kind of odds you were talking about of them all saying, Jesus, this is a dreadful mistake and we should be doing better here and we should be all a bit more grown up. There was very little chance of them going back across to the far side of the world and being welcomed with open arms, or that there being a truce of sorts. But my feelings afterwards were just what a mess it was and what a wasted opportunity it was. And of course, we know what happened in the World Cup. It was our first tournament since 1994. And we know we went out in strange circumstances. People weren't sure how many were on the field at one stage, but we went out on penalties. And I think you could gather from Keane in the interview that he knew this was probably his last chance to say, go further in the tournament, that he was running out of time. And I know from some of the things he said, like he was looking at some of the younger players. I remember him talking about Damien Duff being part of the new breed. And he could see that there was some potential there. And I suppose, like everybody else, he knew that in the aftermath, everybody knew that there was a chance missed.
Tommie, how is it that you were sent over to Manchester when Keane was walking the dog? And then how is it that the interview came about?
I had done a lot of sports work when I was in Brussels. I always had an interest in sport. I covered, different events while I was based in Brussels, including, say, a lot of the Manchester United stuff, Champions League stuff. Got to meet and got to know Alex Ferguson. One of the big reasons that there was an Irish interest in Manchester United at the time was we had the 2 Irish players. We had Dennis Irwin and Roy Keane, and United were flying at the time. So I had that experience. And people say in Donnybrook knew that I was interested in sport. So I had returned to Belfast, Joe, and I was based there. And at the time of the bust up in Saipan, I had no involvement with sport on the island of Ireland, but Brian O'Connell, who was RTE's London correspondent, he was off at the time. And this was going to be, get to the spot and see what can be done. Tony O'Donoghue and say the heavyweights from our sports department, they were already away at the World Cup. So because I was near an airport, and also because I had crewing, I had a great cameraman called Conor O'Brien who was used to, moving as soon as something happened. So we had good editing facilities and we had a reputation for being fast around the courts. So for that reason, Ed Mulhall rang me and he said, look, don't know what will come out of this. Keane is coming back. There's been the big row in Saipan that everyone was talking about. And can you go over? And it wasn't to get an interview at that stage, Joe. It was to go over and see what happens because, the sequence of events only began to unfold once he got back, say, into the UK. Then it became known that he was going to be doing an interview with the Mail on Sunday. And that's when I had my first contact with Michael Kennedy, who was Roy Keane's agent at the time. He had Irish roots, and I got on well with him. And he was a pragmatic kind of a person. And it was a pretty simple argument to make, or an obvious one to make, that look, if the captain of Ireland is, falling out with the team, and if he's giving an interview to an English Sunday newspaper, it's not going to look the best. And surely he'd like to put his views and his case to the Irish public because Keane is quite patriotic. He's quite attached to his country, always has been. Yeah. So the great thing I had going for me, it wasn't that I was a genius or that I had a great reputation. What I had going for me, Joe, was I had the brand, I had the access to the airwaves, and I had the logic of the argument. Eamon Dunphy says, and I'd say it's true, that he was friendly with Roy Keane in those days. I think he was working on his biography with him, and he says that Roy Keane asked him, "What about this fella Gorman?" And he said, "You'll get a fair shake there. He'll be okay." And that's how it came about.
How much notice did you have? And was it at a hotel?
Well, what happened was, you know yourself in journalism, the first thing you got to do is you got to get to the place where the story is breaking. So we just took a flight from Belfast to Manchester, hired a car. And then, you have to mark the turf, or there's another phrase you could use, but let's just say mark the turf just to show that we were there, fly the flag. Yeah. So we did a quick story when we went on the Friday because we weren't sure when was Keane returning. Then the word came through he was coming in. I think he came into London. And then, of course, we had found out where his house was. He had that walled house out in Healey, pretty posh district. Heard Michael Richards talking about going for an Italian meal in Healey after the Etihad celebrations the other day. Well, we were outside the house in Healey. That was on the Saturday. Then Keane came back. And interestingly, there were a lot of crews there. Remember this girl, I think the girl was from Sky who was asking him about, what's the dog's name, Roy? And when he came, he arrived in this vehicle. I think he was in the back. Then it was explosive, just visually so strong when he came out in that defiant stance with Triggs, and he went off, walked down the road, and he went into woodlands. And of course, we followed after that, and then he came back. Then the word got out among most of the people there that, look, there's some deal done with the Mail on Sunday. He's not going to be saying anything. And they all disappeared. So we had the place pretty much to ourselves from then on. Then it was a case of working the phones with Michael Kennedy. And one of the amazing things about him, I didn't have a mobile for him. And I rang the office number on the Saturday. And he was in the office. That's the kind of person he was. Like, I'd say he probably had the phone switched through to the house at night. He was that kind of man. He was very, very dedicated. Really got to like him in the following years. And then the conversation with him started. And then there was a chance, and then we were pushing and pushing. And I think it was probably on the Monday morning that it was confirmed. And the only sort of guarantee we gave was that, it wouldn't be edited. That there was no sort of agreement about what kind of questions, no deals on no-go areas. Like it was an open book in that regard. And then it was a question of getting the logistics together. I had Conor O'Brien, the cameraman, with me, and we went and we hired a second freelance guy just to dress up the shot a bit so he could have two camera shoot. And then it was a question of the venue. We hired a room in a local hotel, and then it was game on. We didn't really have an awful lot of time to think about it. Did a few colour packages, I think, on the Sunday for the Sunday Bulletin.
We had Keane at a big roadshow a couple of years ago at the Bordgosh Energy Theatre, and it's probably remembered because he was quite explosive on stage. But I have to say, pre-show and then even briefly as he was heading off post-show, he was incredibly personable. He really was, charming to all around him. Did you talk to him much in advance, or was it pretty quickly down to business?
I was so relieved to see him arrive at the hotel, because you can imagine you're expecting him to come, but there was no guarantee that he'd show up. So when he arrived, I was, delighted. So I noticed when he came into the hotel, he was very respectful to the staff who were there. And we had hired a room. We asked for a room, so we got, I think it was a ballroom or a function room where maybe you'd have weddings and conferences and whatever. So we had a section of that. And Connor's a wonderful cameraman. Like, he dressed the shot beautifully. The lighting in it was gorgeous. And like, Keane was coming through the screen. He's very, very visual, very, very handsome. He has great presence. The chit chat I had with him beforehand was, I was telling him how when we were waiting for him to come on the Saturday, we were noticing that you couldn't see that much of the house because there were gates, but we could see the top windows, and some of his kids were at the top windows, with the curtains, started opening the curtains. So I said the kids were obviously looking forward to you coming home. And I found it a really disarmingly nice side of Keane, where, he wouldn't say, oh, of course they would be looking forward to their father coming home. He said, sort of kind of dismissive of himself and the love they'd have for him. He said, oh yeah, expecting the presents. That was one of the reasons why, when I was working through the interview, that was one of the reasons why I mentioned kids and children, because you could see the obvious love that he had for his kids. Another thing we picked up when we were hanging around Hale over that weekend, we went into a few shops and, went into the newsagent shop, and it was one of these shops that probably is open 16, 18 hours a day, a man working really hard there. And he said to him that Roy Keane was always respectful to him when he came in for his papers. And we were in this fancy sort of, I think it was an antique shop as well as a coffee shop. And the woman there said, oh, he comes in with his father sometimes when his father is over from Ireland. He's always very respectful towards his father as well. So, you got at ground level, you got, say, those little anecdotes that painted the other side of Keane. Like, I had seen him in some of the big football matches. I was in the Stadio dell'Alpi the night that he tore Turin apart, pulled United up by the bootstraps, scored one of the goals, picked up the yellow card, and as a result knew that he was out of the Champions League final, but put his team there because through his performance. I was also, quite tellingly, I covered the first Irish Ireland versus the Netherlands game. That was in, I think, maybe October or November of the year. And it was the match where they went 2-up. Unbelievable start. And then the Dutch pulled them back to 2-2. And I remember Keane coming off after that match, and you could see he was fuming. And that was the Ferguson influence on him. Like, I saw close up at, said, those United campaigns where they almost made Champions League finals and they were progressing and progressing. I saw them in places. I was down in Dortmund when they played. I saw them in Porto. And like the insistence on excellence that they had. And you could even see, we'd go to the training sessions. And I remember when Steve McLaren was brought into United and the way they changed some of the approaches to, say, the sessions they were doing and how more detailed it was getting. And you could see they were building and building and building. And Keane was very, very obviously in that setting. He was the fighting dog. He was the gladiator that Ferguson knew. In the heat of battle, this guy will flay around him and he'll kill all around him and he'll get you the result. So I knew that he had that very, very decisive side to him. And I saw with my own eyes in Amsterdam that time that Keane was rightly pissed off that they hadn't, when they had the Dutch by the throat that night, that they hadn't stuck the knife into them and killed them off, and that they hadn't taken the 3 points rather than a draw.
You've interviewed some heavy hitters. As you're about to start, as you're in the room, are you nervous?
Well, you're very, very conscious that you're about to do something significant, and you don't want to screw up. You don't want to come across like an idiot, and you don't want to not ask the obvious. And you're keen. You're wanting to try and do something productive, like when somebody is having the trust with you or circumstances have them in the situation where they're sitting opposite you. Like it's a great honor and it's a great responsibility, and it's also it's a great challenge. But with him, I really wanted to talk to him, and for lots of reasons. I was at the stage of my life where I wanted to see the issue that an awful lot of people in Ireland were interested in, was whether there was any chance of this fellow going back. I didn't see any point in interviewing him just to see how angry he was, or to get him to say stuff, that would be incendiary and, that would wind things up even further or keep the door completely shut. Like,
Well, do you know, Tommie, because I've a bunch of clips here and people are texting in as well, and they have a few questions as well. So, for instance, here's one clip where your approach in that respect is very obvious, and you're talking in this clip. Mick, it's the third one we picked out about, or actually we'll go with language first of all. So this is initially the first chunk of the interview, to briefly remind people, is Keane talking about his various grievances. And I have to say, on watching them again, his grievances are absolutely valid. When he lays them all out, it was such a farce. That goes without saying. And then you move into the meeting after the Irish Times interview. And so this is where you pick him up, I suppose, on his language. Just have a listen.
Roy, do you accept that the language used wasn't very nice? I know Alex Ferguson has used expletives in his time. I know Mick McCarthy has done it as well. But do you accept that it's not the kind of language one expects from a leader of men? Especially when it gets out.
Well, this was a private meeting. This was a private team meeting.
But I didn't
call a press conference 15 minutes after the meeting. I didn't go and say what apparently people were saying.
But how about the actual language itself? Do you accept that it wasn't very complimentary to Mick McCarthy, and that he was justified in feeling hurt by it?
Justified in questioning my loyalty to my country. Asking the lads in front of me, saying the Iran match, I faked an injury, when he spoke to my manager in front of me. He knew I wasn't right.
And then just a moment or two later, we come back to language. Have a listen.
So obviously there's going to be language. I wasn't going to sit there and say, excuse me, Mick, I think you're a little bit out of order. Of course you're going to use language. And I said things to Mick. And I'm 100% behind what I said.
Mick, are you sorry for the way you said it? And it's not a sign of weakness if you say you're sorry.
I agree with you. But no. As I said, over the last few days, usually, no matter what you might do in life, you make decisions, whether it be moving house, moving jobs, getting your hair cut, buying a pair of shoes, and you might have some doubts, did I do the right thing? But the last few days, I don't feel, there's not one doubt in my mind where I stand, not one doubt. And that's good enough for me.
So you can hear you like doing everything in your power to suggest it's not a sign of weakness. Is there anything that you'll concede here? And he's like, I agree with you, but no. And the whole country went, It's like a shot going just past the post. I have a few other clips later on I'll play you where something similar happens. But it is clear your approach was not to get in there and kick a hornet's nest. You felt like a peace broker as much as an interviewer across the half hour that I watched.
Well, I really felt that he was entitled to be understood. And like what comes out for me listening to that clip there was how personally insulted and hurt he was, the idea that he faked injury. And like everyone knows that, Keane had bad injury and was running out of time in his career. And his body, after the serious injury that he had, the body will never be as good as it was before the damage was done. So I think you get a sense of that from him there. I think there's a later time in the interview where I was just really too loose with my own language and where he absolutely hammered me for it, where I was suggesting, that maybe he had done wrong or that he should apologize, and he just went off his head. And I just said to myself, look, there's no point in going here. Let's just back out of there and see where else we can go. And see, because for me, the fact that he wanted to put his case to the Irish people showed that there was still unfinished business with him. And like, you were always conscious of the fact of where Keane came from, that he had to fight for everything he got, that he always saw himself as an outsider. Yeah, and that, say, even on the football field, like he had to be absolutely better than most of them. That's why he was the captain of the Irish team. So you were conscious that this was an extremely talented athlete who felt that he was due respect, felt that he wasn't getting the respect, and was never going to say, Jesus, I made an awful mess of that, and please, Mick, can I come back?
Yeah. And you were certainly delicate. So, instance, here's a clip where you're picking up on the point where he's just done the interview in the Irish Times and there's the infamous meeting. And I think it's obvious in your questions, even in just some of the pauses here, that you're hoping he might acknowledge in some respect that going public in the Irish Times the way he did was understandably not great from Mick's perspective. So here we are. This is the infamous meeting.
And I went for my meal at 6:30 on the Thursday, and I was told there was a meeting at 7:30. And I knew what it was all about. I knew. And
But Roy, do you see that from Mick McCarthy's perspective, this was a challenge to him? You were the team captain. He was the manager. Here was this article in the paper. Okay, maybe he made a mistake in bringing it into the public.
The article in the paper was fine. If anybody reads it, it's fine.
You don't think that it might have undermined the morale of the other players? That you'd be critical as a training preparation.
If you read it, it's fine. Anybody who read the piece, it's fine. I questioned the training facilities, which I said to Mick, and that was about it.
It's very clear by the pause that you did read it and you didn't think it was fine, but you were judiciously deciding to what extent you were going to say that.
Yeah, there was no point in going there.
No.
Because I think he needed to say that himself. Like, the more interesting thing to see was there any soft side to him? That, like, sometimes if you just, I felt that, look, let him off there. If that's the way he wants to say it, even if he doesn't believe that 100%, well, let him off there and move on to another subject. Like, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to do, to sort of get into an argy-bargy with them. But that was going to serve no purpose as far as I was concerned.
Well, you get close enough in the closing exchanges, I think. Can you hang on 2 seconds, Tommy, and we'll take a very quick ad break? Okay, Tommie Gorman's going to stay with us. Back in 1 second with Tommie Gorman. Joe Malloy here in studio. Our football show coverage brought to you by Sky. You can watch every UEFA Champions League and Europa League match live on BT Sport this season. We are 20 years on from, well, Saipan, and in particular Tommie Gorman chatting to Roy Keane. Some text messages in. Great to hear Tommie on the radio. Fantastic, trusted journalist down the years, says Emer. Phil says, Tommie, a great storyteller. Vividly remember watching the interview with my dad. Not quite great times, but memorable. We spent the night waiting to see if Roy had given enough of an olive branch. We figured he hadn't at the time. And Graham says, if it came down to it, was Tommie Team Roy or Team Mick?
Do I answer that last one?
Absolutely. If you have a strong answer, absolutely.
I was Team Ireland, Team Sensible, and I think we all lost when Keane didn't go back. I think we would have been a much better team with them. I was struck by the second text you read out there about wondering about the olive branch and had enough being done. Personally, I think that Keane there was a side of Keane that wanted to go back, and I know that he spent a fair bit of the night watching, say, what was coming. I think Sky had the usual 24-hour news service, so he was monitoring that. It was a different era in terms of communications. You didn't have Twitters and Instagram, and you didn't have that kind of massive social media industry in those times. But for me, when I heard that John Delaney had actually been on our 6-1 news. Now, remember, this piece went out at 8 o'clock, and a young John Delaney was left to man the fort, a young, inexperienced John Delaney, because all his colleagues were on the far side of the world. And I think he gave an interview into the 6-1. We had a clip of the stuff on the 6-1, but he gave an interview that, from what he heard, Roy hadn't said enough. And there's one thing I'm sure of, is that John Delaney hadn't heard the whole interview, because we were still working on it. And as I told you at the top of the programme, we were feeding it live. So he sort of made I don't know whether he was the executioner, but I think he made a bit of a judge and jury decision about it. Don't think it was deliberate, trying to shut the door, but I think that's the impact it had. Also think that because of, say, the circumstances in which Keane left, the guys being in boot camp, or not anything but boot camp, but being in camp in Saipan on the other side of the world, I think the die might have been cast there as well, and that it would have taken an abject apology from Keane to turn things around.
Well, I remember...
I was struck, if I can make this point, yes. I watched him on Monday night on the pitch, after City won the Premiership, and I think he has found his space. I don't think he'll ever be a good manager. I think he's a stunning pundit. I think he's electric on television, and I noticed how when Guardiola came over after this really big day in his life, when all seemed lost, and then he got it back again, and unusually he cried. And Guardiola came in and, gave some comments to the guys who were there, probably part of the contract. But I noticed when Guardiola was leaving that he made it his business to go over and had a discussion with Roy Keane off camera. And that's the respect that somebody like Guardiola has for Keane.
With regard to the olive branch, these two clips are as close as we got, and this is towards the end, 2/3 in, and I guess you decide. He's aired his grievances. You've delicately let him make some points which other people could have had issues with, and then I suppose just it became apparent how silly and needless you thought the whole thing was, as did most of us, I suppose. So here's the I suppose the think of the children section, I guess we can call it. So this is about 2/3 of the way in, and this is where he starts to crack a touch.
There's this very soft side to you. I saw you the other day when you were being pursued by the photographers, and a wee laddie says something to you about Manchester United, and you smiled and you turned around to him and you said, "Thanks very much, son." I saw your children waiting at the windows when you were coming home. They were delighted to see you home. Well, what about all the little kids in Ireland who have you as a role model, who love you, who would love to see you back in the World Cup, and who are absolutely appalled that this row has taken place and don't know what to say? Exactly. Well, do you think I've enjoyed the last few days? It's been hard. Of course it has. I'd love to play in the World Cup. I played in '94. It was fantastic. 8 long years ago. And I've done no more, no less than the other lads in the squad to get us back. And I would love to play. Of course I would. But, again... And everyone in the country, from the Taoiseach down, would love to see this result. There are 13, 14-year-olds who tell their parents, "I don't want to play football anymore, I'm depressed." Well, kids who wear your, jerseys with your name on it, they're absolutely haunted by what's going on. They don't know what to make of it. Well, that'll pass. People have to get on with their lives, To a football tournament. My loyalty was questioned. I was called a liar in front of a group of people. And then after that, of course, there was more to it. As I said, I didn't realise it was a press conference. I think within a half an hour, maybe less. And I know the kids in Ireland, and I feel bad for it myself. Of course I do. But I want to go back to Ireland. I've got my family over there. You know? But there's, you know, I have to stand up for what I believe in. I'll live and die by my actions. And I will continue to do so. I'll tell my kids what's right and what's wrong. But what happened to me was wrong.
But you're an Irishman and very proud of it. You know the country we live in. We know in the north we're asking people who have been at each other's throats for years and years to make compromises, to say I'm sorry, to put up their hands, to shake hands. And here we have our football team riven by division, destroyed by division. Is there no way that you, Mick McCarthy, the Irish footballers, can give people an example and show what people in the north and people in the country are trying to do, that you're prepared to do the same? Or is that alien to you guys?
No, it's not. As I said, if for 1 second, if I thought, since I got back home the other day, for 1 second I thought, maybe, Roy, maybe you were a little bit out of order, or maybe there's a way back, I'd be back on that flight. No doubts in my mind about that. But I went to my room and we had 3 players in a press conference. Within 20 minutes to half an hour of it. Sitting there behind Mick. We'd all spoke about it. People look at them as role models. They're cowards.
I know that in football, the guy who pulls out of a tackle or the guy who compromises is seen as weak, that he's not the kind of guy you want in a team. But in life, sometimes it's the guy who compromises, the guy who offers the apology, that he gains strength from that.
I agree with you 100%. Life's too short. Life's too short.
Would it not be a very big thing for you to do?
If I went back, I couldn't give 100% for my country. I couldn't.
Oof. I mean, bereft children, the peace process. You tried your best in that one.
Yeah, and could you feel him wavering a bit?
Listen, absolutely wavering a bit. The weight of it. I mean, the weight that must have been on him.
Yeah, he's a very complex guy, but he's a smashing guy as well. And every time you think of Keane, you just have to bear in mind that he was the absolute best as a footballer. And sometimes there's a price to be paid for that in the kind of stretch you have to make to accommodate him. Ferguson knew how to handle him. And I suppose the brutal side of sport, when the equation wasn't working for United anymore, Roy Keane knew that his time there was up. And that's how life goes. That's what Ferguson had to do throughout his career as a manager, to be a successful manager. But Ferguson wanted him to go back, and Ferguson thought it was a load of nonsense, the whole row that was going on in the Irish camp. I also think, Joe, it would be very, very unfair for me to say, or to leave it open there or hanging there, that Mick McCarthy was the villain in the piece. Like, Mick McCarthy was, he was a wonderful servant to Ireland as a player, as a manager. It's very, very good values, as honest as they come. And Keane, I just think, was a different class of a footballer, and he was probably too hot to handle for Mick in the circumstances. But the biggest weakness in the whole goddamn thing, and it was borne out by subsequent events, the biggest weakness was that the FAI did not have the resources, the personnel, the structures, the ideas, the philosophy to handle, talents like Keane, and to be able to accommodate the Keanes as well as the Damien Duffs and the Jason McAteers and the Robbie Keanes and the Packy Bonners and the Shea Givens. The FAI wasn't at the races. And one of the good things, and I'm a League of Ireland fan, one of the good things now is I see the FAI and indeed the League of Ireland, that they're in a different place.
Before you go, I want to ask you, was Keane happy with the interview? But here's the finale. And so you got to remember, this is 34 minutes of him being militant militant. Like, ironically, we're doing the 20-year anniversary. At one point you say to him, but Ryan, 10, 15 years, are you not going to regret this? And, well, we're at 20 and counting, and he still maintains he doesn't. But then just right at the end, we get this kind of cliffhanger, and this is where you're really kind of pushing him. Come on, this is Thursday, matches on Saturday. So here's the finale to the interview.
Yeah, but you're talking about your sense of grievance. And
sense of grievance?
Well, I'm just giving.
I'm not talking about my sense of grievance. I'm giving my side of the story.
No, but right. But you say what was done to you was wrong, and you've explained why. But aren't wrongs all relative things? And what about the sense of wrong to those poor people who save their money, who follow Ireland, who love you, who want to teach your kids? Yes, you're right. He is a hero. He's a fantastic fella. What about the sense of confusion they feel that you guys can't sort this out as adults?
You're probably right. You know, as I said, I'm agreeing with a lot of your points, and I do realise there's kids in Ireland, there's people in Ireland. My family were supposed to travel, and it's all got messy. But nobody wanted that. Nobody. As you said, maybe there is a way. Maybe there is, but who knows? Who knows? And we'll have to wait and see. You know, the match is Saturday. We're running out of time. But as I said, my conscience is clear, and that is the most important thing in my life. It really is.
But if the other parties in this come to you, the FAI, Mick McCarthy, a proud man, the players, if they come to you and say, for the good of the country, we want to find a solution to this, we'd like it to be playing for Ireland, are you willing to meet them halfway?
I want to play for Ireland. We'll have to see. Possibly, yes. But there's nobody who wants to play for much as Ireland as me. As I said, I've been involved since I was 15, 14, gone for trials up in Dublin. And this is what it's all about, playing in World Cups. So, hopefully, you never know. You just never know. But, we'll see.
It's hurting you, this?
Oh, of course it's hurting me. Dead right it is.
And then suddenly we're back to Brian Dobson. We don't know what the hell to think. Does that mean he's coming back? So that was the cliffhanger. There's a tweet in from somebody who says, a 31-year-old man saying, I live and die by my actions. And then the person has like hands over head emoji. This is the intensity of Keane. I remember reading Niall Quinn's autobiography. Again, communications being what they were. You know, phones being held up to televisions and transcripts, and there wasn't enough in the transcript, but then people saying to Niall Quinn, well, he looked sorrier than the transcript reads, and you know, this is the insanity of it all. You said you got close to Kennedy, I guess, over the years. You may have heard what Keane made of the interview, or maybe did you have much of a conversation when you said cut, that's a wrap? Did he seem that like, I'm happy with that, was a fair account? Did he feel it represented him well?
I think we were all pretty tired after it because it was very intense. Just the small little group we had in the corner of this big hotel conference room. And there was just sort of silence after it. I said thanks and said we'd get on with it and be sending it back. And I walked him out, Joe, I walked him out to the car. I remember there were staff in the hotel and asked him for an autograph. He was perfect gentleman in doing that. There was no, star behaviour, really mannerly. And saw him go off in the hotel. And then we came back and we started getting to work on it. I know in Keane's case that he was waiting to see what the reaction would be. He didn't say, that's that now and book is closed. And I'd say part of him was fed up with this guy who had put him through the ringer, that I'd hit him with all these moral questions and mention how John O'Mahony got the Donnellans to sort of heal their differences, and Galway had won in All-Ireland, and look what they're doing up north, and look at all the kids back in Ireland who, Jesus, are wound up about this, and putting all that on his shoulders. So I'd say to have all that weight put onto him, I'd say part of him was a bit fed up with that. But I had dealings with him afterwards. He came over to Dublin to do a thing for the guide dogs, and I was given that interview with him. It was the first thing he did when he came back. And he helped me. This is an interesting story. Martin McGuinness one Friday rang me and asked, was a young lad from Derry going over to a match on the next day in United were playing against Southampton, and could the young lad get to meet Roy Keane? Now that was a big stretch because it was the day after, very little time. But the young lad was very sick, and I got on to Michael Kennedy. And the next day, match took place. I think United won maybe 3-2, and Keane came out of the players' lounge with Ruud van Nistelrooy, looked for the young lad, brought the young lad into the players' lounge, spent time with him, and then took off his jersey and presented him with the jersey. And the young lad was very sick. He died not long after that. But I took that to be a sign of the Roy Keane that I'm very sure is there, that soft side of Keane. Also thought it was kind of not ironic, but interesting the way that afterwards he and McCarthy were reconciled. He was reconciled with Niall Quinn. I don't think he has a great relationship still with Jason McIntyre, even though McIntyre got really important goals in that campaign. I think he got one in each of the matches against the Dutch, the one in Amsterdam and the one in, didn't he get the goal in Dublin?
Yeah, both, yeah.
And then, you know, the most interesting twist of all, he actually came to work for the FAI with Martin O'Neill. So pragmatism kicked in, you know, in the end on several fronts.
Thank you so much for coming on. We are sadly out of time. I'm sure we could do another half hour if we had to. But Tommie Gorman, real pleasure. 20 years on. Flew by, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Tommie, for coming on.
Nice talking to you, John. Keep up the good work.